Hello, here is a book I read today called 14 Wolves, a Rewilding story. Now, this is actually just a book I found on my bookshelf. I didn't know we had it, but it made me think, is this to do with the video that I was sent a few years ago by a friend of mine who lives in San Diego about how reintroducing wolves, to Yellowstone National Park, which is huge. It's the world's oldest national park. In fact, it's 150 years old because it was 1877. I think it was declared a national park, Yellowstone National Park. It covers 3 states, so it's 150 years old. And my good friend from San Diego, who's from London actually, but he lives in San Diego. You know who you are. He sent me a video a while ago, fascinating video, and I remember wanting to show it to my daughters, but I'm not sure if I did. I can't remember. Anyway, I found this book on the bookshelf, and I thought, I wonder if this is about that, and this is about that. So, Yellowstone National Park, by 1995, I think it was apparently quite barren. It wasn't the rich ecosystem that it once was, and somebody, lawyers, scientists, researchers, after 20 years, won a decision to be allowed to reintroduce wolves to Yellowstone National Park. Wolves are the apex, the top predator, or were the top predator in Yellowstone before they were hunted to extinction, because, farmers, hunters, they don't like wolves. Wolves have a very soft fur, so they're hunted for their fur, and they also hunt livestock. And there are parts of America, I think Wyoming's one of the places in America where there are more cows than humans. So the beef industry and everything else. So I read this book, and 14 wolves were reintroduced. They were taken from Canada, and they were reintroduced into Yellowstone in 3 separate packs. And then it's basically the story about that. It's really interesting. The wolf started something called a trophic cascade, which is what happens when the reintroduction of one animal, it may specifically mean an apex predator, changes the ecosystem, because what they do affects all the other species, which affects the environment and everything else. So, for example, there were too many elk in Yellowstone National Park. Elk grazed too much of the grass, so they ate everything. Not much in terms of new plant life was able to grow because it got eaten before it could grow. Also, because there was nobody hunting the elk, the wolves used to hunt the elk. They grazed at riverbeds, meaning that rivers, actually trees couldn't grow there anymore, so the banks weakened, so the rivers, the banks collapsed. There were less trees. Because there were less trees, there were less birds, and so on and so on. The next predator after the wolves are hunted to extinction, was the coyote, which hunts small animals. And obviously, with the overhunting of those animals, there's lots of other things that can't happen. Less biodiversity because there's less rabbit poo, for example, and moving around of seeds and different plants. So actually really fascinating. Bear also suffered because the wolves weren't there, because wolves are the apex predator, so they hunt the most. They leave lots and lots of carcasses lying around, carrion lying around, and then the bears feast on that. With less of that, the bears had less meat, so they were weaker, so their numbers dwindled as well. So the introduction of the wolves led to an increasing number of bear. I can't remember what the cited cause or the link was, but beaver numbers also increased. Now, beavers are often called, engineers, river engineers. So they build these dams, which means that the dams they build basically strengthen riverbanks, more trees. The pools they create, the deep pools they create, are good for fish, are good for insects, and the whole thing. Basically, Yellowstone apparently went from an unbiodiverse, is that a real word, place, which had pretty much become barren, not too many plants and everything, to a once again rich ecosystem. Numbers of condors increased as well, and other birds of prey, because of the carrion that the wolves were leaving lying around. So I thought it was fascinating. At the end of it, there's sort of He does a little diagram here. So this book is done for children. It's a great book. I mean, it's a 20-minute read, but it's really quite fascinating, and it talks about how the one species affects the other and everything else. It's nice to illustrate this book. There's no photographs. It's all painting or illustrations, paintings. Who knows if they're painted or they're done on computer. It also talks about rewilding, which is the reintroducing of species to places all over the world. So in the Netherlands, they've reintroduced bison because there was a problem in the Netherlands where they had too much grass. In the Galapagos Islands, they reintroduced giant tortoises. Whales in the Philippines. Whales are amazing. Apparently, one whale absorbs as much CO2 as I think it's 30,000 trees or something like that. That's from memory. It was something I watched at the Science Museum in London. In South Korea, tigers have been reintroduced. In the United Kingdom, beavers are being reintroduced. And there's a lot of benefits to all of this, according to the book. Also in the book is a history of what happened to the wolves, the 14 wolves that were initially reintroduced from Canada. Most of them died in fights with other wolves or in fights with other animals. A lot of them, unfortunately, especially in the early days, were shot because hunters don't like them, farmers don't like them. But now there are wolves. Now there are wolves in Yellowstone, and Yellowstone is much richer and better for it, with a greater variety of species, including trees and everything. Now, as soon as I finished reading this, I saw a news article pop up on my phone about the myth of reintroducing the wolf. All right, so this article basically talks about, and it's from today, it's from The Guardian. This article talks about how maybe people are overselling reintroducing the wolf. It's not always good, and they don't actually say anything bad about it. It talked about Yellowstone, but it says a lot of the positive changes we saw back then were not necessarily caused by the wolf, but were caused by other factors such as a climate which, in conjunction with the reintroduction of the wolf, made things better, let's say. What's happening here? I appear to have a phone call coming in. Is it still recording? It's still recording, so I can carry on. All right. So it doesn't actually say, this article, anything necessarily bad about reintroducing wolves or other species. And once again, it talks about the reintroduction of other species. But it does say that a lot of what happens when you reintroduce a predator or another species has to do with other factors, such as the environmental factors, and all the results aren't going to always be the same, which is kind of obvious, isn't it? Take an Alka-Seltzer, and let's call that the apex predator. This is just an analogy. And you drop it in water, it's not going to have the same effect as if you drop it in tea or into a bathtub. Of course, the environment makes a difference, but generally it seems that it's quite fascinating. Over millions and millions of years, or hundreds of thousands of years. It always makes me laugh when people say things like, humans thrived on a vegan diet for millennia. Humans haven't been around for millennia. That's so dumb. Depends on the environment, but generally a good thing. Very interesting read, an easy read, for adults. Pick up the book, read it. I'd recommend it. For children, great read. I love it. And the article seemed very relevant as well. So hope you enjoyed the review. Just a book I picked up today and read. I like it. I like wolves as well. My favourite animal is probably bison, but that's a different discussion. Well, I don't know. Depends if you're talking about large mammals or what you're talking about. I don't like snakes. But there you go. Random book review. Hope you enjoyed it. The book, by the way, is 14 Wolves, a rewilding story, published by Bloomsbury and written by Catherine Barr and Jenni Desmond. There you go.